Noah Bennett's hand was already gripping the back of his chair, ready to shove it aside and walk straight out of that restaurant until a voice he knew from 1,000 company emails stopped him cold. "Noah, wait. I'm your blind date." The words hit him like a fist to the chest. His CEO. The woman who signed off on his paycheck, who could end his career with a single phone call, sitting across the candlelight waiting for his answer. Before we go any further, drop the name of the city you're watching from right now, so I can see just how far this story has traveled tonight. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated. Noah Bennett's fingers were wrapped so tightly around the back of the chair that his knuckles had gone white. Every muscle in his body was screaming at him to run. His feet were already turned toward the door. His heart was slamming against his ribs so hard he could feel it in his throat. Because the woman sitting across from him, the woman with the candlelight flickering against her face, the woman who had just spoken his name like she'd known him for years, that woman was not supposed to be here. That woman was Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Innovations, the company that put food on his table, the company that paid for Lily's school shoes and her piano lessons and the roof over their heads, the company where Noah Bennett was on paper nothing more than another badge number in the IT department. And now she was looking at him with an expression he had never once seen on her face in 3 years of walking past her office. Not the composed, unreadable mask she wore in boardrooms. Not the confident stride she used crossing the lobby while a dozen executives scrambled to keep up with her. She looked nervous. She looked human. "Noah," she said again, softer this time, like she was afraid the word itself might scare him off completely. "Please, just sit back down." Noah didn't sit. His mind was moving faster than his mouth could keep up with. This was wrong. This was impossible. Someone had made a mistake. Rachel had made a mistake. His sister meant well, but she'd clearly grabbed the wrong name off some dating app, some matchmaking service, "I need to go," Noah said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "This isn't, I can't be here." "Why not?" "Because you're my boss." The word landed heavy between them. A waiter passed by with a tray of wine glasses, oblivious to the storm happening at table 12. Victoria didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands on the white tablecloth and looked at him with a steadiness that made his stomach twist even harder. "Technically," she said, "I'm the CEO of a company with 4,000 employees. I've never met most of them. I didn't hire you. I don't manage you. I don't even know which floor you work on." "That doesn't matter," Noah shot back. "Everyone in that building knows who you are. If anyone finds out I had dinner with you." "They won't." "You don't know that." "I do, actually." Something flickered behind her eyes. Tired, guarded, like she'd learned this lesson the hard way more than once. "Because I chose this restaurant specifically because none of my board members eat here. I came in through the side entrance. I didn't bring a driver tonight. I didn't tell my assistant where I was going." She paused. "I was trying to protect both of us, Noah, not just myself." He stared at her. For a moment, the fear in his chest cracked just slightly, replaced by something else. Confusion, mostly. Because nothing about this felt like the calculated maneuvering of a corporate shark. It felt like a woman who had genuinely not expected her blind date to be an employee of her own company, and who was now scrambling, just like he was, to figure out what to do about it. "You didn't know," he said slowly. "You didn't know it was me." "No." Victoria shook her head. "My assistant set this up through a private matchmaking service. I gave her one rule: no names, no photos, no backgrounds. I just wanted—" She stopped herself like she'd almost said too much. "I wanted one night where I wasn't Victoria Sterling, CEO. I wanted to just be Victoria." Noah's jaw tightened. He understood that feeling more than she could possibly know. Every single day, he wasn't allowed to just be Noah. He was Dad. He was the guy in IT who fixed everyone's frozen laptops. He was the man everyone whispered about. Did you hear his wife passed? And he's raising that little girl all alone. He hadn't had the luxury of being just Noah in 7 years. "I still have to go," he said, though the certainty in his voice had softened. "I have a daughter. I have a job. I can't afford to lose either one over a mix-up." Victoria's expression shifted, not offended, not annoyed. Something closer to disappointment aimed inward at herself. "Of course," she said quietly. "I understand. I'm sorry for putting you in this position." She reached for her purse, the picture of composure snapping back into place like armor. "For what it's worth, Noah, I didn't come here tonight looking for anything complicated. I just wanted one dinner where someone talked to me like a person instead of a job title." Something about the way she said it flat, resigned, like she'd already accepted disappointment as the default outcome of her entire life, made Noah pause with his hand on the back of the chair. He thought about all the mornings he woke up at 5 a.m. to make Lily's lunch before his shift. He thought about how the last time anyone had looked at him and seen Noah instead of the widower or the tech guy was longer ago than he wanted to admit. He sat back down. Victoria blinked clearly, not expecting it. "You don't have to—" "One dinner," Noah said, cutting her off before he could talk himself out of it. "That's it. We eat, we talk like normal people, and tomorrow this never happened. Deal?" For the first time since he'd walked in. Victoria. Sterling smiled. Not the polished, camera-ready smile from the company's annual report. A real one. Small surprised, a little relieved. "Deal," she said. 3 hours earlier, none of this had seemed possible. Noah's day had started the way it always did, the blaring alarm at 5:45 a.m., the shuffle down the hallway to check on Lily, the smell of burnt toast because he was always one text message away from being late. "Dad, you're doing the thing again," 8-year-old Lily said from the kitchen table, not even looking up from the cereal box she was reading like a novel. "What thing?" "The staring at nothing thing. Rachel says you do it when you're stressed." Noah forced a laugh and slid a plate in front of her. "Rachel talks too much. She says you have a date tonight." The spatula in Noah's hand froze mid-air over the pan. He turned slowly. "She told you that?" "She tells me everything." Lily shrugged entirely, too pleased with herself. "Is it true?" Noah exhaled long and slow, the way he always did when he was buying time, to figure out how honest to be with his daughter. Lily had her mother's eyes, sharp, curious, always seeing more than he wanted her to. "It's just dinner," he said finally. "Your aunt set it up. It's nothing serious." "Mom's been gone a long time, Dad." The words landed softer than a blow, but somehow hurt just as much. Noah crouched down to her eye level, the pan still sizzling behind him, forgotten. "I know, sweetheart." "I'm not saying you have to replace her." Lily's small hands fidgeted with the edge of the table. "I just don't want you to be lonely forever. That's all." Noah pulled his daughter into a hug, resting his chin on top of her head, blinking hard against the sudden sting behind his eyes. 8 years old, and she understood him better than most adults ever had. "I'm not lonely," he lied. "I have you." "That's not the same thing, and you know it." He laughed despite himself, pulling back to look at her. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart. You're just slow." She grinned, then went back to her cereal, like the conversation had never happened, leaving Noah standing in the middle of the kitchen, with a full heart and a burnt piece of toast smoking behind him. By the time Noah made it into the office that morning, his phone was already buzzing with a text from his sister. "Rachel, don't you dare cancel tonight. I already told the matchmaking service you're excited." Noah, "I never said I was excited. I said I'd think about it." Rachel, "Thinking about it for 3 weeks is canceling Noah. You promised." He sighed, sliding his phone back into his pocket as he badged into the Sterling Innovations building. The lobby buzzed with its usual morning chaos, executives in tailored suits striding past reception junior associates, clutching lattes and folders. The low hum of a company that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, generating more revenue before 9 a.m. than Noah made in half a year. He kept his head down and made his way to the elevator bank reserved for support staff. That was his world. Floor 14. Server room's ticket queues, broken monitors, forgotten passwords. Nobody up in the executive suites on floor 40 knew his name, and that suited him just fine. His coworker Danny was already waiting by his desk when Noah clocked in, a grin plastered across his face. So, big date tonight. How does everyone already know about this? Your sister posted about it, tagged half the building. Danny spun in his chair. Come on, man, it's been 7 years? You deserve a night out. Noah dropped into his chair and pulled up his ticket queue, half-heartedly scrolling through a list of complaints about slow Wi-Fi on the 22nd floor. It's one dinner. Some woman from a matchmaking service. I don't even know her name. Mystery date. I respect it. Danny leaned over the cubicle wall. You nervous? Terrified, Noah admitted. I haven't done this in longer than I can remember. What if I say something stupid? What if she asks about work, and I bore her to death talking about server maintenance? Just be yourself, Danny said. Worked on your wife, didn't it? Noah's chest tightened at the mention of her, the way it always did. Not sharp anymore, not like it used to be, but a dull ache that never fully disappeared. Yeah, he said quietly. It did. Danny softened, clearly realizing he'd stepped somewhere delicate. Sorry, man. I just mean, you're a good guy, Noah. Any woman would be lucky. Noah offered a tight smile and turned back to his monitor, grateful when a new ticket popped up and gave him something else to focus on. Server room 3rd floor overheating unit. He grabbed his badge and headed for the stairwell, glad for the excuse to move. The server room was cold and loud, the low hum of a dozen machines working overtime. Noah crouched beside the overheating unit, running diagnostics, letting the familiar rhythm of the work settle his nerves. This was easier than people. Machines made sense. You found the problem, you fixed it, and it stayed fixed. He didn't know, kneeling there in the cold hum of the server room, that months from now, this exact spot would matter more than he could ever imagine. By 6 p.m., Noah was standing in his bathroom, staring at himself in the mirror, tugging uncomfortably at the collar of a shirt he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral reception. You look like you're about to give a eulogy, Rachel said from the doorway, arms crossed, clearly amused. I feel like I'm about to give a eulogy. It's dinner, Noah, not a hostage negotiation. Feels the same right now. He turned to face her. Rachel, I don't know if I can do this. Her expression softened, and she crossed the small bathroom to fix his collar herself, the way she used to when they were kids, and he had trouble with his tie before school dances. You've spent 7 years putting everyone else first, she said. Lily, work. Me, honestly, more than you should have. You're allowed one night to just be a person again. What if it doesn't feel right? What if all I can think about is her? Rachel's hand stilled on his collar. She knew exactly who he meant. Then you'll know, she said gently. And that's okay too. But you won't know anything if you don't go. Noah looked at his reflection again, the tired eyes, the gray creeping into his temples earlier than it should have, the face of a man who had spent so long being strong for everyone else that he'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe. Fine, he said finally. One dinner. That's my brother. Rachel smiled and swatted his arm. Now go. Lily's already begging me for pizza and a movie marathon. She's more excited about tonight than you are. He drove Lily to Rachel's house first, the two of them sitting in comfortable silence in the car, Lily's small hand occasionally reaching over to fidget with the radio dial. You'll call me if it's bad, right? She asked as he pulled into Rachel's driveway. Like a code word or something. Noah laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd managed all day. A code word. Yeah, like text me pineapple, and I'll call you and say there's an emergency so you can leave. Where did you even learn that? YouTube. She said it like it was obvious. So, deal. Deal, Noah said, ruffling her hair before she scrambled out of the car and up the driveway toward Rachel, who was waiting on the porch with a bowl of popcorn already in hand. He sat in the driveway a moment longer, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing. One dinner, he told himself. You can survive one dinner. He had no idea how wrong and how right that thought would turn out to be. The restaurant Rachel had booked was the kind of place Noah had walked past 100 times, but never once considered stepping into. Marble floors, low golden lighting, a hostess stand manned by someone who looked like she could smell his discount cologne from across the room. He almost turned around right there in the entryway. "This isn't your world," a voice in his head whispered. "Look at this place. You don't belong here." But he thought of Lily's face, hopeful and encouraging in the driveway. He thought of Rachel's insistence that he deserved this. He straightened his shoulders, gave the hostess the reservation name, and followed her through the dining room toward table 12. His eyes found the woman seated there before his brain had time to process who she was. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but definitely wasn't. A blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent. And a face he had seen 100 times on the company website, on the cover of the annual shareholder report, pinned to the break room bulletin board, on the massive portrait hanging in the lobby of the building he walked into every single morning. Victoria Sterling. Noah stopped walking. Just stopped dead in the middle of the restaurant like his legs had forgotten how to function. This is a mistake. This has to be a mistake. There's another table. This isn't... But then she looked up, and their eyes met. And he watched in horrifying real time as recognition dawned across her face too. Her posture shifted just slightly. Her hand froze halfway to her water glass. She knew him. Of course she knew him. He might not know her, not personally, not beyond the polished photograph in the lobby, but she had absolutely without question recognized him. Noah's stomach dropped straight through the marble floor. He turned to leave. That was the only thought his brain could produce. Turn around, walk out, pretend this never happened. He could already feel the panic clawing up his throat, the mental math running through every possible way this could destroy the fragile stability he'd built for himself and Lily over the last 7 years. His job, his paycheck, Lily's school fees, her health insurance, the roof over both their heads, all of it tied one way or another to Sterling Innovations. And he was about to sit down to dinner with the woman who sat at the very top of that entire structure. He got 3 steps toward the door. That was when he heard her voice, low and urgent, cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant like it was meant only for him. "Noah, wait." He froze. "I'm your blind date," she said, quieter now, almost like a confession. "Please, don't run. Just give me 2 minutes." And that was how Noah Bennett, single father, IT technician, a man who had spent 7 years building a wall so high nobody could get close enough to hurt him again, found himself turning back around and walking toward the one table in the entire city he had absolutely no business sitting at. The first few minutes at the table were the most uncomfortable of Noah's life. Neither of them spoke. Victoria kept her hands folded on the tablecloth, and Noah kept his eyes fixed somewhere over her left shoulder, unable to bring himself to look directly at her. A waiter approached to take drink orders and immediately sensed the tension retreating faster than he'd arrived. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. "You work in IT." It wasn't a question. Noah's head snapped toward her, startled. "How do you know that?" "I don't actually, not for certain." A faint, almost embarrassed smile crossed her face. "But I recognized your name the second the hostess said it. Noah Bennett. You're the one who flagged the cooling system failure in the 3rd-floor server room last spring. The report went all the way up to my desk because it prevented what could have been a catastrophic data loss." Noah blinked, stunned. "You read that report?" "I read every incident report that crosses my desk. Most CEOs don't. I do." She shrugged like it was nothing, though the pride was hard to fully hide. "It was thorough, detailed. You didn't just fix the problem, you explained exactly why it happened and how to prevent it from happening again. Most technicians would have just patched it and moved on. I just didn't want anyone to lose their work." Noah said, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that the CEO of a 4,000-person company remembered his name from a maintenance report filed over a year ago. There were people on that server who'd lose months of data if it went down. That's exactly my point. Victoria leaned forward slightly. You cared about people you'll probably never meet doing a job most people don't even think about until it breaks. That kind of integrity is rare, Noah. Rarer than you'd think, especially at the level I operate at. Noah didn't know what to say to that. Nobody talked to him like this. Like his work, his quiet, unglamorous, thankless work actually mattered to someone beyond a paycheck. I still don't understand why you're here, he said finally. You could have anyone, executives, actors, people from your world. Why a blind date through some anonymous service? Victoria's expression flickered, and for just a moment, the confident CEO mask cracked just enough for Noah to see something underneath exhaustion and something that looked a lot like loneliness. Because everyone in my world already knows exactly who I am before they say a single word to me, she said quietly. They know my net worth. They know my company's quarterly earnings. They've already decided what they want from me before we've even shaken hands. She traced the rim of her water glass absently. I wanted one night where somebody looked at me and saw a person instead of a balance sheet. Noah studied her for a long moment. He thought about his own life, the way people had looked at him differently after his wife died, like he was made of glass. Like grief was something you could catch just by standing too close. He knew what it felt like to be reduced to a single story people told about you before they ever really knew you. I get that, he said finally. More than you'd think. Victoria's eyes met his, curious now. What do you mean? Noah hesitated. This wasn't a conversation he had with anyone, let alone a stranger, let alone his CEO. But something about the honesty in her voice made him want to match it. My wife died 7 years ago, he said. Car accident. Left me with a 2-year-old, and about 1,000 ways people started looking at me differently. Some people treated me like I was fragile. Some people avoided me completely because they didn't know what to say. Nobody just talked to me like I was still, you know me. Victoria's expression softened into something gentler than sympathy. I'm sorry, she said, and it didn't sound performative the way condolences so often did. It sounded like she actually meant it. That's an incredible weight to carry alone. I had help, my sister mostly, but yeah. Noah rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly aware he'd shared more in 5 minutes with this woman than he had with anyone in years. It's been a long 7 years. And your daughter? What's her name? Lily? His voice softened instantly at the mention of her, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time all night. She's 8. Smartest kid I know. Probably smarter than me, honestly. I'd believe that. Victoria smiled a real smile again, the second one he'd seen from her tonight. And it changed, her entire face softened the sharp corporate edges into something warmer. What's she like? And just like that, without either of them fully realizing how it happened, the conversation shifted. Noah found himself talking about Lily's obsession with dinosaur documentaries, her habit of narrating her own life like she was the star of a nature program, the code word she'd invented in case tonight went badly. Victoria laughed an actual laugh, not the polished chuckle she probably used at board meetings, and for a moment Noah forgot entirely that the woman across from him controlled his paycheck, his benefits, his entire professional future. She was just Victoria. Telling him about growing up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment with 3 siblings, about the year her family couldn't afford heat, and she did her homework wrapped in every blanket in the house. About the scholarship that got her into business school, and the decade of 18-hour days that built sterling innovations from a failing startup into an industry giant. Nobody knows that part, she admitted at one point, swirling the wine in her glass. The board thinks I came from money. It's easier to let them believe that than to explain that I clawed my way here one impossible year at a time. Why not tell them the truth? Because vulnerability gets used against you in that world, Noah. The second people know where you came from, they think they know your limits. I learned a long time ago it's safer to just let them wonder. Noah nodded slowly, understanding more than he expected to. I get that too. People at work think I'm just the quiet IT guy who keeps to himself. They don't know I used to want to be an engineer. Actual engineering, not just fixing broken monitors. I had a scholarship lined up before. He stopped himself. Before your wife, Victoria finished gently. Before everything changed, he corrected, though they both knew it meant the same thing. I gave it up. Needed something stable. Something that paid immediately. Something that let me be home for Lily every night. No regrets, he added quickly. I mean that. But sometimes I wonder. You don't have to justify that to me, Victoria said. Choosing your daughter over a career path isn't a compromise, Noah. It's the kind of decision most people in my world wouldn't even understand, let alone respect. They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that surprised Noah with how little it scared him. He'd expected this dinner to feel like an interrogation, a minefield of wrong words and worse consequences. Instead, it felt like the first real conversation he'd had in years. Can I ask you something? He said finally. Of course. Doesn't this scare you? Sitting here with an employee, if anyone found out? It terrifies me, Victoria admitted without hesitation. The board would have a field day. The press would spin it into something ugly, no matter how genuine it actually is. I know exactly what I'm risking by being here. She met his eyes steadily. But I'm tired of making every decision in my life based on what's safest for my image, instead of what actually makes me happy. Just once, I wanted to choose the second thing. Noah felt something shift in his chest. A wall he'd built brick by brick over 7 years cracking just slightly at the foundation. He'd spent so long protecting himself and Lily from every possible risk that he'd forgotten what it felt like to want something purely because it made him happy, consequences be damned. I should probably still be terrified right now, he said. Given everything you just said, you should be. Victoria agreed, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. I would be in your position. But I'm not. Not as much as I was 20 minutes ago anyway. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Noah considered the question, honestly weighing it the way he weighed every decision that might affect Lily's stability. I don't know yet, he admitted. Ask me again at the end of dinner. Victoria raised her glass slightly, an unspoken toast to the uncertainty hanging between them. Deal. They talked for 2 more hours, about everything and nothing. Lily's dinosaur phase, Victoria's terrible first attempt at learning to cook, after she moved out of her parents' apartment, Noah's disastrous first day on the job, when he accidentally locked himself out of the entire server system and had to call his supervisor at midnight to fix it. Somewhere between the appetizers and the dessert, neither of them had ordered, but somehow ended up sharing. Noah realized he had laughed more in one dinner than he had in the past several months combined. He'd forgotten what that felt like, the easy rhythm of conversation with someone who wasn't tiptoeing around his grief, who talked to him like a person with a full, complicated life instead of a cautionary tale. But underneath the laughter, underneath the surprising ease of it all, a quiet dread kept circling back. Because no matter how much he liked talking to her, and he did more than he was prepared to admit, even to himself, the math hadn't changed. She was still his CEO. He was still an employee 4 levels below anyone she should ever be having dinner with. And somewhere out there, in the vast anonymous machine of Sterling Innovations, thousands of people depended on the clean professional separation between the executive suite and the server room staying exactly where it was. As the night wound down and Victoria signaled for the check, refusing gently but firmly to let Noah pay for a single thing, the reality of the situation settled back over both of them like a cold front rolling in. This was... Victoria paused outside the restaurant, searching for the right word, as the valet brought her car around. I don't actually know what to call this. Unexpected doesn't feel like enough. Yeah, Noah agreed. Unexpected is an understatement. For what it's worth, she said, turning to face him fully. I meant everything I said tonight, about wanting to just be seen as a person. You gave me that even for a few hours. I haven't felt that in a long time. Noah's chest tightened at the sincerity in her voice. You gave me the same thing, he admitted. I haven't talked about my wife about any of it this openly, with anyone outside my sister in years. They stood there a moment longer, neither quite ready to say goodbye, both acutely aware of everything standing between them. The org chart, the power imbalance, the sheer impossibility of two people from such wildly different worlds building anything beyond one accidental extraordinary dinner. I should go, Noah said finally, though his feet didn't move. You should, Victoria agreed, though hers didn't either. This can't happen again. You know that, right? Tonight it was a mistake. A wonderful mistake, but still a mistake. I can't risk my job. I can't risk anything that would affect Lily. I know, Victoria said quietly. I understand completely. But neither of them moved. And in the silence that stretched between them, under the restaurant's golden awning, Noah felt something he hadn't felt in 7 long years. A pull toward another person so strong it scared him more than any boardroom, any scandal, any risk to his career ever could. Good night, Victoria, he finally forced himself to say, taking a step back toward his car. Good night, Noah. He drove home in silence. Lily's code word sitting unread and unused on his phone. His mind replaying every single moment of a dinner he had absolutely no business enjoying as much as he had. Somewhere behind him, in a different car, heading in a different direction, Victoria Sterling was doing exactly the same thing, both of them telling themselves the same lie. This ends here. This has to end here. Neither of them believed it. Not really. Not even for a second. Monday morning came too fast for both of them. Noah sat at his desk on the 14th floor, staring at a ticket queue he couldn't focus on, his coffee going cold beside his keyboard. He'd read the same line of code 4 times without processing a single word of it. Every few minutes his mind wandered back to the restaurant, to the sound of Victoria's laugh, to the way she'd looked at him like he was the only person in the room instead of just another badge number on the company directory. You're doing it again, Danny said, appearing over the cubicle wall with his usual grin. The staring thing. Lily called it, apparently. I'm working. You're staring at a ticket for a printer jam on the 9th floor like it holds the secrets of the universe. Danny rolled his chair closer. So, how was it Mystery Woman live up to the hype? Noah's jaw tightened, and he forced his eyes back to the screen. It was fine. Fine, that's it. 7 years of celibacy, and all I get is fine. Danny. I'm just saying a guy doesn't stare into space for an hour over fine. Danny crossed his arms, waiting. Noah exhaled slowly, weighing exactly how much of the truth he could afford to give away. Not the whole truth. Never the whole truth. Not here. Not in this building. Not where a careless word could travel from floor 14 to floor 40 faster than any email chain. She was interesting, he said finally. Smart. Complicated. Real in a way I wasn't expecting. Complicated how? Just complicated. Noah picked his coffee back up, if only to have something to do with his hands. It's not going to happen again anyway. Different worlds. It wouldn't work. Danny studied him for a long moment, clearly unconvinced, but he let it go, rolling back to his own desk with a shrug. Your loss, man. You looked happier this morning than I've seen you in years. Just saying. Noah didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice not to give something away. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost ignored it. He had 6 tickets stacking up and a supervisor who liked numbers to stay low, but something made him check it anyway. Unknown number. I know I said this ends here. I keep telling myself that too. It isn't working very well. Noah's heart slammed once hard against his ribs. He didn't need a name attached to know exactly who it was. He glanced around the office instinctively, as if someone might be reading over his shoulder before typing back with hands that weren't quite steady. Noah. How did you get this number? Unknown number. Your sister's dating profile listed a contact for the matchmaking service. I may have asked a favor. Noah. That's either very resourceful or very concerning. Unknown number both. Probably. I'm the CEO of a tech company. Resourceful is sort of the job description. Noah found himself smiling at his phone screen, despite every warning bell going off in the back of his mind. He glanced up, checked that Danny was absorbed in his own monitor, and typed back before he could stop himself. Noah: "This is a bad idea, Victoria." Victoria: "I know." Noah: "We agreed. One dinner, nothing more." Victoria: "I know that too. I'm not asking for more. I just wanted to say thank you. For Friday. I haven't stopped thinking about it, and I needed you to know that even if nothing else happens." Noah stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Every rational part of his brain was screaming at him to end this now, to type back something firm and final, something that would close the door before either of them got hurt, worse than a single dinner's worth of regret. He thought of Lily. He thought of his job, his health insurance, the mortgage payment due on the 15th of every month. He thought of the way Victoria Sterling had looked at him across that table, like he was the most fascinating person she'd ever met, instead of just the quiet guy who fixed the Wi-Fi. Noah: "I haven't stopped thinking about it either. That's the problem." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Noah watched them with something close to torture, his coffee forgotten entirely now. Victoria: "What if it doesn't have to be a problem? What if we just talked? Sometimes. Nothing more than that. No expectations." Noah closed his eyes. He knew exactly how this story went. He'd heard it 100 times, from 100 different mouths. It's just talking. It's nothing serious. It won't go anywhere. Right up until it went somewhere, neither person had the courage to stop. But God help him, he typed back anyway. Noah: "Just talking." Okay. He didn't know it yet, but that single word, okay, was the first domino in a chain neither of them would be able to stop once it started falling. 40 floors above him, Victoria Sterling set her phone face down on her desk and immediately picked it back up to reread the message, a habit she hadn't indulged in since she was 22 years old, and hopelessly infatuated with a boy from her business school cohort who'd never once looked at her twice. "You're smiling at your phone," said Patricia Nguyen, Victoria's executive assistant of 9 years, standing in the doorway with a tablet full of the morning's schedule. "You never smile at your phone. You glare at it. What happened?" Victoria straightened immediately, the CEO mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "Nothing happened." "What's on the schedule?" Patricia raised an eyebrow but didn't push, setting the tablet down on the desk instead. "Board prep at 10. Quarterly projections review at noon, and Marcus Hale wants 15 minutes before the board meeting to, and I quote, discuss some irregularities in the department budgets." Victoria's shoulders tensed at the mention of the name. Marcus Hale had been passed over for the CEO position 4 years ago, when the board chose Victoria, instead, younger, hungrier, with a vision for the company that had ultimately tripled its market value in half a decade. Marcus had smiled through the announcement and shaken her hand in front of the cameras, and he had spent every year since quietly, patiently looking for a reason to prove the board had made the wrong choice. "What kind of irregularities?" Victoria asked. "He wouldn't say. You know how he is, likes to keep his cards close until he's ready to slap them on the table in front of an audience." Victoria pinched the bridge of her nose. "Wonderful. Tell him I'll give him 10 minutes, not 15. And Patricia?" She hesitated, weighing how much to say. "If anyone asks about my schedule on Friday night, I was at a dinner meeting with a potential investor. Nothing more specific than that." Patricia's expression flickered with understanding, though she was too professional to ask outright. "Understood," she said simply, and left the office without another word, one of the many reasons Victoria trusted her more than almost anyone else in the building. Alone again, Victoria allowed herself 30 seconds, no more, to sit, with the strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. 30 seconds to remember the sound of Noah's laugh, low and a little rusty, like he hadn't used it in a long time. 30 seconds to remember the way he'd talked about his daughter, with a tenderness that had nothing to do with performance, nothing to do with impressing anyone. Then she closed her eyes, exhaled, and became Victoria Sterling, CEO again. There was a company to run, a board meeting to survive, a man named Marcus Hale circling her with irregularities she didn't yet understand, and instincts telling her not to underestimate. She had no idea sitting there at her desk with her phone still warm from Noah's last message. How closely those two threads of her life, the man in floor 14 and the man circling her from the boardroom, were about to become tangled together. The first secret meeting happened 4 days later in a coffee shop 2 neighborhoods away from Sterling Innovations, chosen specifically because neither of them had ever set foot in it before, and neither of their co-workers were likely to either. Noah got there first, choosing a corner table with his back to the wall, an old habit from a childhood where his father taught him to always know where the exits were. He'd told Rachel he was picking up extra hours at a side gig. He'd told Lily he had a work thing. 2 small lies stacked on top of each other, and already he hated how easily they'd come out of his mouth. Victoria walked in. 11 minutes later, wearing jeans and a plain gray sweater, her hair down, instead of pulled back so different from the polished executive he'd grown used to seeing on the company's promotional materials, that for a moment he almost didn't recognize her. "You look different," Noah said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Is that a compliment or a complaint?" Compliment. Definitely a compliment. He felt his own face warm and looked down at his coffee cup to hide it. "You look like a person. Not that you didn't before, I just mean you look like you're allowed to just exist right now. Not perform." Victoria's expression softened in a way that told him he'd said exactly the right thing without meaning to. "That's precisely how it feels," she admitted. "Like I'm allowed to just exist. Do you know how rare that is for me? I'm starting to understand." "How was your weekend with Lily?" Noah smiled instantly at the mention of his daughter, the tension in his shoulders easing the way it always did. "Good. She dragged me to the Natural History Museum for the 4th time this year. She's decided she wants to be a paleontologist now. Last month it was a marine biologist, the month before an astronaut." "She sounds incredible." "She is." Noah wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "She asked about you, actually. Well, not you specifically. She asked if the date went okay, if I was going to see the woman again." Victoria's eyebrows lifted. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it was complicated." Noah met her eyes, which felt like the understatement of the century considering the woman in question runs the company that employs her father. "When you put it that way, it does sound a little dramatic." "It is dramatic. That's exactly my point." Noah leaned forward, lowering his voice, even though the coffee shop was nearly empty. "Victoria, I keep asking myself what we're doing here. What happens if someone sees us? What happens if this gets back to the board or to HR or to anyone who could use it against either of us?" Victoria's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away from him. "I've thought about that every single day since Friday," she admitted. "I don't have a good answer for you, Noah. I know exactly how risky this is. I know what it could cost both of us if it comes out the wrong way to the wrong people at the wrong time." She paused, searching for the right words. "But I also know that I haven't felt this alive in years, and I'm tired of making every decision in my life based purely on risk management." "That's easy for you to say." Noah said, an edge creeping into his voice that surprised even him. "You have resources, lawyers, a board that worst case might fire you, but you'd land somewhere else in 6 months with a golden parachute the size of a small country's GDP. I have a mortgage and a daughter and exactly 1 paycheck between us and disaster. If this goes wrong, I don't have a soft landing. I have nothing." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Victoria's expression shifted, not offended, but genuinely stung, like his honesty had cut somewhere she hadn't expected. "You're right," she said quietly. "I wasn't thinking about that. I should have been." Noah immediately felt a flicker of guilt at the rawness of his own outburst. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No, don't apologize. You're right to say it." Victoria reached across the table, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then rested her hand lightly over his. It was the first time they'd touched since the restaurant, and Noah felt the contact travel up his arm like a current. "I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built for Lily." If you need to walk away from this right now, I will understand completely. No hard feelings. No consequences at work. I promise you that much." Noah looked down at her hand over his, feeling the war inside his own chest. The responsible father, who knew exactly how much was at stake, and the man underneath, who hadn't felt this much like himself in 7 long years. "I don't want to walk away," he admitted, quiet and a little raw. "That's the problem. Every logical part of my brain is telling me to end this right now, and I don't want to listen to any of it." Victoria's fingers tightened slightly over his. "Then we'll be careful," she said. "We'll figure out how to do this without either of us losing what matters most. I promise you that." Noah wanted to believe her. God, he wanted to believe her more than he wanted to believe anything in years. But some quiet, cautious part of him, the part that had learned the hard way exactly how quickly a good life could shatter into pieces, couldn't quite shake the feeling that promises like that were the kind neither of them could actually guarantee. They kept meeting. Quietly, carefully, always in places neither of them frequented: a bookstore, 2 towns over, a park bench near a lake. Nobody from the office would recognize a diner that served terrible coffee, but had booths tucked far enough in the back that they could talk without being overheard. Each time Noah learned something new about the woman behind the CEO title. He learned that Victoria hated flying, but did it anyway 40 weeks a year because the company demanded it. He learned that she'd taught herself to play piano at 19, using a second-hand keyboard and free lessons online because she'd never been able to afford real ones as a kid. He learned that underneath the confidence, underneath the boardroom armor, there was a woman who still sometimes doubted whether she deserved any of what she'd built. "Everyone thinks I got here because I'm ruthless," she told him one evening, sitting on a park bench with her shoes kicked off and her feet tucked beneath her, more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "The truth is, I got here because I was terrified of ever going back to where I started. Every decision I've made has been driven by fear, not confidence. I just got very good at hiding it." "That's not so different from me," Noah said. "I gave up an engineering scholarship to take a steady job because I was terrified of not being able to provide for Lily. Everyone at the office thinks I'm just quiet content with fixing servers for the rest of my life. Truth is, I settled. I was too scared not to. Do you regret it?" Noah considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things concerning his daughter. "No," he said finally. "Not really. Lily's worth every sacrifice I ever made. But sometimes I wonder what it would have felt like to want something just for myself again. It's been a long time since I let myself do that." Victoria turned to look at him fully, something soft and searching in her expression. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Something you want for yourself?" Noah's breath caught in his throat. He thought about lying, about deflecting the question with a joke the way he usually did when things got too close to honest. Instead, he reached over and gently took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers for the first time. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think it might be." Victoria's eyes glistened in the fading evening light, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. They just sat there, hands intertwined, 2 people from impossibly different worlds who had somehow found something real in the space between them. Meanwhile, Lily had begun noticing the change in her father, the way children always notice things adults believe they're hiding well. "You're humming again," she announced one evening, watching him from the kitchen table while he made dinner, an easy smile on his face he wasn't even aware of wearing. "Am I? You haven't hummed since before Mom died. Rachel told me you used to hum all the time when she was alive." Lily studied him with the same sharp, unnervingly perceptive gaze she'd inherited from her mother. "Is it the mystery lady? The one from your work thing?" Noah froze at the stove spatula halfway to the pan. "What work thing?" "The one you keep leaving for. You think I don't notice, but I do. You come back happier every time." Lily crossed her arms, entirely too pleased with her own detective work. "Is she nice?" Noah sat down across from his daughter, weighing carefully how much truth an 8-year-old deserved, and how much would only complicate a situation that was already complicated enough for the 2 adults involved. "She's very nice," he said finally. "But it's still new, sweetheart. And it's a little complicated. I don't want to make any promises to you until I know it's something real. Is she going to make you sad again? Like some of the ladies from Aunt Rachel's app did? The question landed harder than Noah expected. He reached across the table and took his daughter's small hand. I hope not, he said honestly. But I promise you this, if it ever starts hurting either of us, I will end it. You come first. You've always come first. That's never going to change. Lily seemed to consider this with the gravity of someone twice her age, then nodded satisfied. Okay, she said simply. But I want to meet her, eventually, when it's not complicated anymore. Noah smiled, blinking hard against the sudden sting behind his eyes. Eventually, he agreed. I promise. He had no idea sitting there at his kitchen table with his daughter's small hand in his, how soon, eventually, was about to arrive, or how much would go wrong before it did. Well, the first crack in their careful secrecy came 3 weeks later at the company's annual Innovation Showcase, an event Noah had no reason to attend, and every reason to avoid, except that his supervisor had specifically assigned him to handle the technical setup for the executive presentations, a task he couldn't exactly refuse without raising questions. He spent the morning running cables and testing microphones in the massive conference hall on the 40th floor, a part of the building he'd set foot in maybe twice in 3 years. Every employee from every department was scattered throughout the space, mingling before the main presentations began. And Noah kept his head down, focused entirely on his equipment, praying he could finish his job and disappear before anyone noticed anything unusual. He hadn't accounted for Victoria walking directly toward him the moment she spotted him across the room. Mr. Bennett, she said, her voice shifting instantly into the crisp professional register she used in front of employees, though her eyes betrayed something warmer underneath. I understand you're handling our technical setup today. Noah's heart lurched into his throat. Every instinct told him to keep this brief professional invisible. Yes, ma'am. Should be ready in about 10 minutes. Excellent. I appreciate the quick turnaround. She lingered a beat longer than a CEO, addressing a random technician ever would, and Noah felt the weight of a dozen curious glances from nearby employees who'd clearly never seen Victoria Sterling personally address anyone below director level. Carry on. She walked away, and Noah exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, forcing his hands to stay steady as he finished connecting the last microphone. He didn't notice Marcus Hale watching the exchange from across the room. Arms crossed expression, unreadable, filing the moment away, with the same careful attention he gave everything that might eventually prove useful. Later that evening, once the showcase wrapped and the executive floor emptied out, Noah's phone buzzed with a text. Victoria. I shouldn't have singled you out like that. I'm sorry. It was reckless. Noah. It's fine. Nobody thought anything of it. Victoria. Marcus Hale was watching. I saw him. Noah's stomach dropped. He typed back quickly, trying to sound calmer than he felt. Noah. Who's Marcus Hale? Victoria. The company president. He was passed over for CEO when the board chose me instead. He's spent 4 years looking for any reason to make the board regret that decision. I don't trust him, Noah. He notices everything, and he forgets nothing. Noah sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the message, a cold dread settling into his chest that hadn't been there before. Up until now, this had felt like a secret carefully contained between the two of them, risky, but manageable. Now, for the first time, it felt like something else entirely. Something with an audience. Something with an enemy circling closer than either of them had realized. Noah, what do we do? Victoria. We're more careful, much more careful. I won't approach you at company events again, I promise. But Noah, I need you to know if he ever does figure this out, he won't come after me first. He'll come after you. It's easier to destroy someone with less to lose. Noah closed his eyes. Lily's sleeping form just down the hallway. The weight of everything he stood to lose pressing down on his chest like something physical. He thought about the code word she'd invented, pineapple, a silly, innocent joke between a father and his daughter, and felt a fresh wave of fear at the thought of anyone threatening the fragile stability he'd worked 7 years to build around her. Noah. Maybe we should stop. Before it gets worse. The reply took longer than usual to arrive. Victoria, if that's what you need, I'll respect it completely. I mean that. But I need you to know something first. These past few weeks have been the first time in years I've felt like myself instead of a title. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. But your safety. And Lily's matters more to me than anything I want. Noah stared at the screen for a long time, torn between fear and something stronger, something that had been growing quietly inside him with every stolen conversation. Every hand held on a park bench. Every honest confession traded between two people who understood exactly what it felt like to be reduced to a single story by the world around them. Noah, I don't want to stop either. Victoria. Then we'll be smarter. No more public risks. No more Marcus Hale watching us across a conference room. Just us careful until we figure out what this actually is. Noah set his phone down on the nightstand, staring up at the ceiling of his dark bedroom. His heart caught somewhere between terror and hope. He thought about his wife, about the promise he'd silently made to himself the day she died. That he would never again let his heart get ahead of his responsibilities. Never again risk everything on something as fragile and uncertain as love. And yet, here he was 3 weeks into an impossible secret with a woman who controlled his entire professional world, feeling more like himself than he had in 7 long years. He didn't know yet just how right Victoria had been about Marcus Hale. He didn't know that somewhere across the city, in an office far less glamorous than the 40th floor of Sterling Innovations, a man who had once worked for the company and been fired under circumstances nobody fully remembered was already watching Victoria Sterling's public appearances with a different kind of interest patient, calculated waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. He didn't know that the storm gathering on the horizon had nothing to do with rumors or watchful executives at all, and everything to do with a much older grudge one that would soon threaten to destroy both of their lives in ways neither of them could have possibly imagined. For now, all Noah knew was the quiet, terrifying certainty settling into his chest as he finally drifted off to sleep that whatever this was with Victoria Sterling, it had already gone too far to simply walk away from, no matter how much safer walking away might have been. The rumors started the way rumors always start inside a company that large, quietly in the margins of conversations that had nothing to do with the truth, until suddenly they had a life of their own. It began with a woman from accounting named Patricia Osei, who lived 2 streets over from the gated community where Victoria Sterling kept a modest townhouse, modest only by the standards of someone worth 9 figures. She'd seen Noah's car, an aging blue sedan that stood out among the luxury vehicles in that neighborhood like a sore thumb, parked outside twice in 1 week. She mentioned it offhandedly to a coworker over lunch. That coworker mentioned it to someone in HR. By the time it reached Danny's desk on the 14th floor, it had transformed from a passing observation into something else entirely. "People are saying you're seeing someone," Danny said, keeping his voice low, even though the office around them was nearly empty, most of the department already gone for the day. Not just seeing someone. Someone specific. Noah's hands stilled over his keyboard. "What are you talking about?" "Patricia from accounting says she's seen your car parked in Ridgemont Estates. Twice." Danny leaned against the cubicle wall, arms crossed. His expression somewhere between curious and concerned. "That's Sterling's neighborhood, man. Half the building lives in fear of that woman, and you're telling me you've got nothing to say about your car showing up 2 streets from her house." Noah felt the blood drain from his face, though he forced himself to keep his voice steady. Casual, the way he'd practiced in the mirror more than once over the past few weeks, dreading exactly this moment. "I have a friend who lives out that way. That's all it is." "A friend?" "Yes, Danny, a friend." Danny studied him for a long moment, and Noah could see the wheels turning behind his coworker's eyes, could see him almost putting the pieces together and then mercifully deciding not to. "Okay," Danny said, finally holding up his hands. "None of my business. Just be careful, man. People talk. Especially about her. You do not want to be the subject of gossip that reaches the 40th floor. Trust me. There's nothing to gossip about," Noah said, though the lie sat heavy and bitter on his tongue. He left the office that night with his stomach in knots, replaying the conversation over and over on his drive home. He'd known somewhere in the rational part of his brain that this couldn't stay hidden forever, not in a building with 4,000 employees and a rumor mill that ran faster than the actual work did. But knowing it and feeling the walls start to close in around him were two very different things. He texted Victoria the second Lily was down for the night, sitting alone at his kitchen table in the dim light of a single lamp. Noah. Someone from accounting saw my car outside your place. Twice. It's already made it to my department. The reply came fast, and Noah could feel the tension radiating through the screen, even in text form. Victoria. How bad is it? Noah Danny asked me directly. I lied. I don't know how long that's going to hold up. Victoria. I'm so sorry, Noah. I should have been more careful. I told you I'd protect you, and I'm already failing at that. Noah. You didn't do anything wrong. This is both of us. I knew the risk when I kept saying yes. Victoria. I need to think about how to handle this. Give me a day. Please don't panic yet. Noah set his phone down and pressed both hands over his face, exhaling slowly, trying to quiet the frantic pace of his own heartbeat. Somewhere in the house, the refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the hallway, his daughter slept peacefully, unaware that the fragile new happiness her father had found was already starting to crack at the edges. He thought about Rachel's words from weeks ago. You deserve one night to just be a person again, and wondered not for the first time whether that one night had already cost him more than he'd ever be able to pay back. Victoria didn't sleep that night either. She sat in her home office, long after midnight laptop open in front of her, staring at nothing, running through every possible scenario in her mind, the way she'd been trained to do since her first year in business school. Identify the risk map. The consequences, engineer the safest path forward. Except this time, the variables weren't spreadsheets and market projections. The variable was a man's entire life, a little girl's stability, a future that had started to feel more real to her with every stolen conversation over the past month than anything she'd built in a decade of relentless professional success. Her phone buzzed. Patricia, her assistant, even at this hour still working, still watching over the company's affairs like she always did. Patricia Marcus Hale requested a closed-door meeting with 2 board members tomorrow morning. No agenda listed. Thought you should know before it lands on your calendar. Victoria's stomach tightened. 2 things happening in the same 24 hours, both circling dangerously close to the same secret, felt like far more than coincidence. She'd learned a long time ago that in corporate warfare, timing was rarely accidental. Victoria. Find out what it's about, discreetly. Patricia. On it. You should get some sleep. Victoria. I will. She didn't. Instead, she opened a blank document and began drafting something she'd been avoiding thinking about for weeks. A formal policy proposal regarding employee relationships and conflicts of interest. Something that could, in theory, protect a relationship like the one she and Noah had stumbled into if it ever came to light in the wrong way, at the wrong time, in front of the wrong people. She worked until nearly 3 a.m, driven by a fear that had nothing to do with her own reputation, and everything to do with the memory of Noah's voice, tight with barely controlled panic, telling her he had nothing to fall back on if this all went wrong. I did this to him, she thought, staring at the cursor blinking on an empty line. I pulled a good man and his daughter into a fire I'm not sure I can put out. She didn't know yet how right that fear would turn out to be, or how much worse the fire was about to get. Tien. Marcus Hale's office occupied a corner of the 40th floor, all glass and sharp angles, designed to intimidate anyone who walked through the door. He sat behind his desk the next morning, hands steepled beneath his chin, watching the 2 board members across from him with the patient satisfaction of a man who had waited 4 long years for exactly this moment. I want to be careful about how I present this, Marcus said, sliding a folder across the desk toward board member Diane Castellano, a stern woman in her 60s who'd sat on Sterling Innovations board since before Victoria was even hired. I don't have concrete proof yet. What I have are patterns, irregularities, things that taken individually mean very little. Taken together, they concern me deeply. Diane opened the folder, scanning the contents with a practiced eye. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized access logs in the IT department. Server activity outside normal maintenance windows. A technician whose personal vehicle has been repeatedly spotted outside our CEO's private residence. Marcus let the words hang in the air, watching the realization dawn across both board members' faces. I'm not accusing anyone of anything yet, but I think it's worth asking whether our CEO's judgment has been compromised by a personal relationship with a subordinate employee, and whether that relationship has created security vulnerabilities within this company. The second board member, a quieter man named Robert Feinstein, frowned. You're suggesting Victoria is involved with an employee. I'm suggesting, Marcus said carefully, that it warrants investigation. If I'm wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right, we're looking at a serious conflict of interest at the highest level of this company, one that could expose us to significant liability if it ever became public in the wrong way. Diane closed the folder slowly, her expression unreadable. You have a name for this employee. Marcus smiled the expression, not quite reaching his eyes. Noah Bennett, IT Department, 14th floor. I'd suggest we look into his access privileges more closely. If there's a relationship here, I want to know whether it's compromised anything beyond appropriate workplace boundaries. What Marcus didn't say, what he'd been carefully planning for the better part of 2 weeks, ever since one of his contacts inside HR had mentioned the rumor swirling through the 14th floor, was that he already had a plan in motion. A plan that would require Noah Bennett's login credentials, a series of carefully falsified transactions, and just enough plausible deniability to make the entire mess look exactly like what it needed to look like. Proof that Victoria Sterling's judgment could no longer be trusted, and that the board had made a mistake 4 years ago that it was long past time to correct. He'd been patient. He'd waited 4 years for the right opportunity. Now, finally, it had practically fallen into his lap. Bye. The accusation landed on a Wednesday morning 3 days after Marcus Hale's closed-door meeting delivered, with the kind of clinical detachment that made it feel even more surreal. Noah was at his desk, halfway through his coffee, when his supervisor appeared beside his cubicle, with an expression Noah had never seen on the man's face, before somewhere between apologetic and afraid. Noah, HR needs to see you, now. What's this about? I don't know the details. They just said it was urgent. His supervisor's eyes darted around the office, clearly uncomfortable. You should probably bring your badge and your laptop. Something cold settled into Noah's stomach as he stood the entire office seeming to watch him from the corners of their eyes as he walked toward the elevator, though he told himself he was imagining it, that nobody actually knew anything yet. The HR office was smaller than he expected, sterile, with a long table and 3 people already seated when he walked in. The head of HR, a woman named Carol Ferris, he'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with in the elevator, a company lawyer he didn't recognize, and Marcus Hale himself sitting at the end of the table with an expression of carefully manufactured concern. Mr. Bennett, Carol said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Please sit down. Noah sat, his heart hammering against his ribs, every instinct screaming at him that this was about Victoria, that somehow, someway, their secret had finally caught up with them. We have some serious concerns to discuss with you. Carol continued, sliding a folder across the table. Our security team flagged a series of suspicious financial transactions originating from server credentials tied to your employee login. Approximately $200,000 moved through 3 shell accounts over the past 6 weeks. Noah stared at the folder, uncomprehending. That's not... I didn't do that. I don't even have access to financial systems. I'm IT support. I fix printers and reset passwords. I don't... Your credentials were used to bypass a security protocol that granted temporary access to the finance server. The lawyer interjected, his voice flat and clinical. The access logs show your login at 2:47 a.m. on 3 separate occasions over the past month. I wasn't even awake at 2:47 a.m. Noah said, his voice rising, despite his best efforts to stay calm. I have a daughter. I'm asleep by 10 most nights. You can check, ask my sister, ask anyone." "We understand this is distressing," Carol said, though her tone remained maddeningly neutral. "But given the severity of the allegations, we have no choice but to place you on administrative leave, effective immediately pending a full investigation." "This is insane." Noah's hands were shaking now, and he pressed them flat against the table, trying to steady himself, trying to think through the panic clawing up his throat. "Someone did this to me. Someone used my credentials. I didn't touch any financial systems. I wouldn't even know how." Marcus Hale spoke for the first time, his voice smooth and unhurried. "Mr. Bennett, I understand this must feel overwhelming. But I have to ask, is there any reason someone might have wanted to frame you? Any personal relationships, perhaps, that might have made you a convenient target?" The question landed like a blow, precise and deliberate, and Noah felt the blood drain from his face as he understood all at once exactly what was happening. This wasn't about financial fraud. This was about Victoria. This was about digging a hole deep enough to bury both of them at once, and Marcus Hale had just handed him a shovel disguised as a question. "I don't know what you're implying," Noah said carefully, forcing his voice into something steadier than he felt. "I'm not implying anything," Marcus said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false innocence. "I'm simply trying to understand how someone in your position might have found themselves in this situation. Perhaps someone with access to more sensitive information than your role would typically require. Someone who might have vouched for you, elevated your access privileges without proper oversight." Noah understood with a sick, sinking clarity exactly what Marcus was doing. Building a narrative, one careful question at a time, that connected the financial fraud directly back to Victoria. If he denied a relationship, it would look like he was hiding something. If he admitted one, he'd be handing Marcus exactly the ammunition he needed to destroy Victoria's career alongside his own. "I have nothing to say to that," Noah said, finally, his jaw tight. "Very well." Carol closed the folder in front of her. "You'll need to surrender your badge and company laptop before you leave the building today. We'll be in touch regarding the timeline of the investigation. I'd strongly advise you to retain legal counsel." Noah walked out of that office in a daze, his badge and laptop confiscated, his entire professional identity stripped away in the span of 20 minutes. He rode the elevator down to the lobby in silence, aware of every curious glance from employees who had clearly already heard some version of what was happening, the rumor mill working faster than he could have imagined possible. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a long time before he could bring himself to drive, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his mind racing through every possible way this could destroy everything he'd built for Lily. His phone buzzed. Victoria. "Victoria, I just heard. Are you okay?" "Where are you, Noah?" "They put me on leave. Financial misconduct. Someone used my login to move $200,000. "Victoria. That's impossible. I need details. I'm calling an emergency meeting with legal right now." Noah Marcus Hale was in the room, Victoria. "He asked me directly if there was someone who vouched for me, elevated my access. He knows. Or he suspects at the very least." The reply took longer this time, and when it finally came, Noah could feel the fear behind every word. "Victoria. This is my fault. I need to fix this. I promise you, I will fix this." Noah closed his eyes, resting his head back against the seat, the weight of everything pressing down on his chest until he could barely breathe. He thought about Lily asleep in her bed that morning, blissfully unaware that her father's entire livelihood had just collapsed. He thought about 7 years of careful, protective sacrifice, all of it hanging by a thread, because he'd let himself want something, someone for the first time since his wife died. Maybe I should have run that first night, he thought bitterly. Maybe some worlds really aren't meant to mix. He didn't tell Lily the truth that evening. He couldn't bring himself to, not yet, not until he understood how bad this was actually going to get. Instead, he picked her up from Rachel's on time, forced a smile onto his face, and listened to her chatter about her day with an attentiveness that felt like the only stable thing left in his entire world. "You're quiet tonight," Lily observed over dinner, pushing her peas around her plate with the particular focus of a child who noticed everything. Bad day at work? Just a long one, sweetheart. Noah forced another smile, hating how easily the lies kept coming lately. How was the museum trip with Aunt Rachel? Good. I saw a new dinosaur exhibit. Did you know some dinosaurs had feathers like actual feathers like birds? I did not know that. Rachel says you've been stressed lately. Is it the mystery lady again? Noah's fork stilled over his plate. He'd underestimated once again just how perceptive his daughter was, how little slipped past her, despite his best efforts to keep the storm clouds gathering over his life far away from her small, carefully protected world. It's a little complicated at work right now, he admitted, choosing his words carefully. Some people think I did something I didn't do. It's scary, but I'm going to fix it. Lily set down her fork, her small face serious, in a way that made her look older than her 8 years. Are you going to lose your job? I hope not. If you do, are we going to be okay? The question hit Noah harder than anything Marcus Hale had said that morning. Harder than the accusation itself. Harder than the badge and laptop he'd surrendered in that sterile HR office. Because here finally was the exact fear he'd spent 7 years trying to protect his daughter from ever having to feel, the fear of instability, of a floor giving way beneath her feet, the way it had when her mother died. He reached across the table and took her small hand in both of his. We are always going to be okay, he said, forcing every ounce of certainty he could muster into his voice, even though he didn't fully believe it himself. No matter what happens with my job, I promise you that. Lily studied him for a long moment, and then, with the simple, devastating trust of a child, nodded and picked her fork back up. Okay, she said. I believe you. Noah excused himself to the bathroom a few minutes later, locked the door, and sat down on the edge of the tub, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes, until the sting behind them subsided. He had promised his daughter they would be okay. He had absolutely no idea in that moment whether that promise was one he'd actually be able to keep. Victoria spent that entire night in her office, surrounded by legal counsel combing through server logs with a forensics team she'd brought in personally, paying out of her own pocket, rather than routing the expense through company channels, where Marcus might have visibility into exactly how hard she was fighting for Noah. The login timestamps don't match any device registered to Mr. Bennett, said the lead forensic analyst. A sharp young woman named Aisha, who'd come highly recommended by Victoria's personal attorney. Someone spoofed his credentials from an external IP address. It's sophisticated but not impossible to trace if we have enough time. How much time? Days at minimum. Possibly longer, depending on how well they covered their tracks. Victoria pressed her palms flat against the conference table, exhaling slowly. I don't have days. The board is convening an emergency session by the end of the week. If we can't prove Noah's innocence before then, they're going to use this as an excuse to push for a vote of no confidence. Against Mr. Bennett. Against me, Victoria said quietly. Marcus Hale doesn't actually care about $200,000. That's pocket change to a company this size. He cares about using this to prove I've compromised my judgment. And he's not wrong exactly. I have compromised my judgment. I fell for someone who works 14 floors below my office, and now it's costing him everything. Aisha hesitated clearly, unsure whether it was her place to weigh in on something so personal. For what it's worth, she said carefully. The access pattern doesn't look like an inside job trying to cover their tracks. It looks like someone with significant technical resources trying very hard to make it look like an inside job. That takes planning. That takes motive. Victoria's jaw tightened. Marcus Hale. I can't say that definitively. Not yet. But if I were investigating this independently, that would be my working theory. Victoria nodded slowly. A plan beginning to take shape in her mind. Reckless, risky, the kind of plan that would either save everything she cared about or destroy it completely with very little room in between. Keep digging, she said. I need proof, not theories. And Aisha, I need it fast. She left the office well after midnight, exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the crushing weight of watching someone she cared about suffer for a choice she'd made, a risk she'd talked him into taking, against his better judgment. She thought about calling him, but it was late and she knew he'd be with Lily trying to hold together some semblance of normalcy for his daughter's sake. Instead, she sat alone in her car in the parking garage, staring out at the empty rows of concrete pillars, and allowed herself finally to cry. Not for herself, not for the company, but for the good, honest man she'd pulled into a fire that was never his to fight. I did this, she thought again, the same accusation she couldn't shake since the moment she'd found out about his suspension. I wanted one night to feel like a person instead of a title, and I destroyed his life to get it. She didn't know yet just how much worse things were about to get before they got better, or that the very policy she'd been drafting in secret, the one meant to protect people exactly like Noah, was about to become the centerpiece of a fight that would determine both of their futures. The board meeting Marcus Hale had been quietly orchestrating for weeks finally convened on Friday morning, 8 days after Noah's suspension, in the same glass-walled conference room where Victoria had been named CEO 4 years earlier. She walked in prepared for war. "I want to address the elephant in the room directly," Victoria said, standing at the head of the table, instead of sitting, refusing to let anyone in that room see her as anything less than fully in control. "Yes, I have a personal relationship with Noah Bennett, an employee in our IT department. I did not disclose it because it began outside of work through a private matchmaking service, neither of us aware of the other's identity until it was already underway." Murmurs rippled around the table. Marcus Hale's expression remained carefully neutral, though Victoria could see the satisfaction simmering just beneath the surface. "I understand the concerns this raises," Victoria continued. "Conflicts of interest, favoritism, the appearance of impropriety. I take those concerns seriously. But I want to be equally clear about something else. Noah Bennett did not commit financial fraud. Someone accessed our systems using spoofed credentials designed to make it look exactly like he did at precisely the moment it would be most damaging to both of us." Diane Castellano leaned forward. "You're suggesting this was deliberate sabotage?" "I'm not suggesting it," Victoria said. "I have a forensics team actively tracing the origin of those transactions. I expect concrete proof within days, not weeks. And when that proof arrives, I intend to find out exactly who orchestrated this and why." Marcus Hale finally spoke, his voice smooth and measured. "With respect, Victoria, this sounds like exactly the kind of judgment we should be concerned about. You're personally involved with an employee under investigation for fraud, and now you're personally directing the investigation into that very fraud. That's a significant conflict of interest regardless of the outcome." "You're right," Victoria said, surprising the entire table by conceding the point immediately. "Which is why I'm proposing something today that I've been drafting for the past 2 weeks. A formal workplace relationship policy, one that establishes clear protocols for disclosure oversight and conflict of interest management. I will submit to independent third-party review of this entire situation conducted by outside counsel with no ties to me or to this board. I have nothing to hide, and I intend to prove that beyond any reasonable doubt." The room fell silent for a long moment, the weight of her offer settling over the table. Robert Feinstein finally spoke, his voice measured. "That's a significant step, Victoria. Are you prepared for what an independent review might uncover?" "I'm prepared for the truth," Victoria said simply. "Whatever it turns out to be." Marcus Hale's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for the first time since the meeting began, Victoria saw a flicker of something beneath his composed exterior, not satisfaction, but concern. She filed that reaction away, more certain than she'd been about anything in days that she was finally circling close enough to the truth to make him nervous. The board voted to allow the independent review, buying Victoria the time she desperately needed. But as she walked out of that conference room, her legs shaking with adrenaline she'd carefully hidden throughout the entire meeting, she knew the real fight was only just beginning. She called Noah the moment she was alone in the elevator, her voice tight with exhaustion and something that sounded dangerously close to hope. "I bought us time," she said the second he picked up. "An independent investigation. I think we can prove this, Noah. I really do." "What if we can't?" His voice was quiet, exhausted, carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent 8 days wondering how he was going to explain to his daughter that everything he'd promised her might not be true after all. "What if it's not enough? Then I'll find another way," Victoria said fiercely. "I am not letting you take the fall for something you didn't do. I don't care what it costs me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Noah finally spoke, his voice cracked with an emotion he'd been holding back for over a week. "I believe you," he said quietly. "I don't know why, given everything that's happened, but I still believe you." Victoria closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the elevator wall, holding onto those words like a lifeline. Because somewhere beneath the fear, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the very real possibility that everything could still collapse around both of them. Despite her best efforts, she understood something with total clarity for the first time since this nightmare began. Whatever happened next, whether they proved Noah's innocence, whether Marcus Hale succeeded in destroying both their careers, whether the board ultimately turned against her, she was not going to let this man face it alone. Not after everything he'd already sacrificed. Not after everything he'd already lost. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Victoria stepped out into the crowded space with her shoulders squared. Her expression composed, giving absolutely no indication to the dozens of employees watching her pass. That inside she was fighting the hardest battle of her entire life. Not for her company, not for her reputation, but for a good man and his daughter and the fragile, impossible future she refused to let anyone take away from them. The days after the board meeting stretched out longer than any week Noah had ever lived through, each one blurring into the next with a suffocating sameness. Wake up, make Lily's lunch drop her at school, come home to an empty house with nothing to do, but wait for a phone call that might end his career for good. He wasn't used to stillness. 7 years of constant motion, constant purpose, constant small fires to put out at work and at home. And now there was nothing but silence, and his own thoughts circling the same worn groove over and over. What if they can't prove it? What if this is it? Rachel showed up on the 3rd day of his leave with a grocery bag full of things he hadn't asked for, and a look on her face that told him she wasn't leaving until she'd said her piece. "You haven't eaten a real meal since this started," she said, setting the bag down on the counter and immediately opening his refrigerator to survey the damage. "Noah, there's nothing in here but condiments and a science experiment I'm not touching." "I've been a little distracted." "I can see that." She turned to face him, arms crossed, her expression softening from irritation into something more worried. "Talk to me, really talk to me, not the version you give Lily where everything's fine." Noah sank into a kitchen chair, rubbing both hands over his face. "They think I stole $200,000, Rachel. Me. I fix printers for a living. And even if Victoria proves I didn't do it, everyone in that building already thinks I did. You know how this works. The accusation sticks even after the truth comes out." "Victoria's fighting for you." "I know she is. That's not the part that scares me." Noah looked up at his sister, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he let some of the fear show plainly on his face. What if fighting for me costs her everything? What if I end up being the reason the board pushes her out, and then I've ruined 2 lives instead of just mine? Rachel pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, her voice gentler now. "You didn't do this, Noah. Somebody did this to you. That's not the same as ruining anything. That's somebody else's cruelty, not your failure. Doesn't feel that different from where I'm sitting. I know." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand the same way she had 1,000 times over the past 7 years, ever since the day she'd shown up at his door with a casserole and a box of tissues, and simply refused to leave until he let her help. "But you've survived worse than this. You survived the worst thing that could happen to a person, and you got Lily through it, and you built something good out of the wreckage. You'll survive this too." Noah's throat tightened. What if it's not just me who has to survive it this time? Rachel didn't have an answer for that, and they both sat in the quiet kitchen for a long moment, the weight of everything unspoken settling comfortably between two people who'd learned a long time ago that sometimes silence said more than words ever could. His phone buzzed on the table. Victoria, Aisha's team found something. "Can you come to my office? Back entrance, second floor freight elevator. I already cleared it with security under a different name. Noah's heart lurched, hope and terror colliding in his chest all at once. He looked up at Rachel, who was already reading the tension in his face. "Go," she said simply. "I'll pick up Lily from school." The freight elevator opened onto a service hallway Noah had used 100 times over the years, hauling equipment carts and replacement monitors. But he'd never once used it to sneak into the executive suite like a fugitive in his own workplace. Victoria was waiting for him at the end of the hall, and the second she saw him, something in her posture loosened like she'd been holding her breath since she sent that text. "Tell me it's good news," Noah said. "It's good news," Victoria confirmed, ushering him quickly into a small conference room where Aisha sat behind a laptop, several windows of code and network logs open across the screen. "Aisha, tell him what you told me." Aisha turned the laptop slightly so Noah could see the display. "We traced the spoofed login sessions back through 3 proxy servers. Took days because whoever set this up knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some amateur job. But proxies eventually leak metadata if you know where to look, and we found a consistent signature pointing to a private contracting firm called Ashford Digital Solutions." Noah frowned. "I've never heard of them." "You wouldn't have. They're a small operation. 3 employees mostly doing freelance penetration testing for corporate clients." Aisha pulled up another window. "But here's where it gets interesting. Ashford Digital Solutions was founded 4 years ago by a man named Gary Whitfield." Victoria's jaw tightened visibly at the name, and Noah looked between the 2 women, sensing there was history here he wasn't yet privy to. "Who's Gary Whitfield?" he asked. Victoria exhaled slowly, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from him. "He was the head of our cybersecurity division 6 years ago. Before I was CEO, actually. I was still Chief Operating Officer at the time. There was a massive data breach, client information for nearly 30,000 customers exposed. It was a catastrophic failure of oversight, and when the investigation concluded, the board needed someone to hold accountable. I was the one who recommended his termination. Was it his fault?" "Partially," Victoria admitted. He'd ignored 2 separate warnings from his own team about vulnerabilities in the system. But he wasn't entirely to blame. The budget for security upgrades had been slashed the year before by executives well above his pay grade, executives who never faced any consequences at all. Gary took the fall for decisions that weren't fully his to own, and he's hated me for it ever since. He's made that very clear more than once over the years. So he's been waiting 6 years for a chance to get back at you," Noah said slowly, the pieces starting to click together in his mind. "And somehow he ended up working with Marcus Hale." "That's the part we still need to confirm," Aisha said. "But the timeline lines up. Ashford Digital Solutions was hired 8 weeks ago by an internal vendor account with executive-level approval authority. The account used to authorize that vendor relationship traces back to Marcus Hale's office." Noah felt something cold and sharp settle into his chest. Not fear this time, but something closer to fury. "He hired the guy who hates you to frame me so it would look bad enough to take you down too. 2 birds. That's exactly what I think happened," Victoria said quietly. "Marcus gets his revenge on the board that passed him over. Gary gets his revenge on me for a termination he's never forgiven. And you." Her voice cracked slightly, and she had to stop swallowing hard before she could continue. "You got caught in the middle of 2 men settling old scores, and you very nearly lost everything because of it." Noah reached across the table and took her hand without thinking, the gesture instinctive now, after weeks of stolen moments that had taught his body to reach for hers whenever things felt like they were falling apart. "This isn't your fault," he said. "You didn't do this to me. 2 vindictive men did this to me, and you're the one who spent the last 2 weeks trying to fix it." "I still feel responsible." "I know you do. That doesn't make it true." Noah squeezed her hand. "So what happens now?" "We have proof. What do we do with it?" Aisha closed her laptop, partially glancing between the 2 of them. "Legally, we have enough to bring to the board and to law enforcement if it comes to that." The vendor authorization alone proves Marcus Hale had direct involvement in hiring the firm responsible for the spoofed credentials. It's not a smoking gun that places him physically at a keyboard, but combined with the timeline and his obvious motive, it's more than enough to clear Mr. Bennett's name and open a formal investigation into Marcus himself. Then let's do it, Noah said, a steadiness returning to his voice that had been absent for 2 long weeks. Let's take it to the board. Victoria looked at him for a long moment, something fierce and proud flickering behind her eyes. Are you sure once this comes out there's no controlling the narrative anymore? Everyone will know about us. Everyone. Noah thought about it. Really thought about it, weighing the fear against everything else he'd learned about himself over the past several weeks. He thought about Lily asking if they were going to be okay, and the promise he'd made her that they always would be. He thought about 7 years of hiding behind caution, behind the safe, quiet life he'd built to avoid ever being hurt again, and how that caution hadn't actually protected him from anything. It had just kept him small. I'm sure, he said. I'm done hiding, Victoria. Whatever happens next, I want it to happen because we told the truth, not because we managed to keep a secret a little longer. The emergency board session convened 2 days later on a Thursday morning that Noah would remember for the rest of his life as the day everything either fell apart completely or finally started to come back together. He sat in the hallway outside the boardroom, in a chair Patricia had brought him personally, waiting to be called in. Not as an accused employee, facing disciplinary action this time, but as a witness, someone whose testimony mattered to clearing his own name. Rachel had offered to come with him, but he'd told her no, that this was something he needed to face on his own, the same way he'd faced everything else over the past 7 years. Through the glass wall of the boardroom, he could see Victoria standing at the head of the table, Aisha beside her with a laptop connected to the main display, presenting the evidence they'd assembled with the same clinical precision Victoria brought to every high-stakes presentation Noah imagined she'd ever given in her career. Marcus Hale sat near the far end of the table, his expression carefully composed, though Noah could see even from a distance the tension in the set of his shoulders. Patricia appeared beside him after nearly 40 minutes. They're ready for you now. Noah's legs felt unsteady as he walked into the boardroom, every eye at the table turning toward him. Diane Castellano gestured to an empty chair, and he sat, forcing himself to meet each board member's gaze in turn, rather than looking away. Mr. Bennett, Diane said, we've reviewed the forensic evidence presented by Ms. Sterling's team. Before we proceed, we'd like to hear directly from you. Can you confirm you had no involvement in the financial transactions in question? I had no involvement, Noah said, his voice steadier than he expected. I don't have access to the finance servers. I've never had access to the finance servers. My job is server maintenance and technical support, printers, passwords, network issues. I wouldn't know the first thing about moving money through shell accounts, and even if I did, I would never risk my daughter's future over something like that. And your relationship with Ms. Sterling? Noah glanced at Victoria briefly before answering, drawing strength from the steady way she held his gaze. It's real, he said simply. It started by accident through a blind date neither of us arranged personally. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't complicate things because it clearly does. But it's not a scheme, and it's not something either of us used to gain anything from the other. If anything, it's cost us both more than either of us anticipated when it started. Marcus Hale shifted in his seat, and Diane turned toward him, her expression cooling considerably from where it had been at the start of the meeting. Mr. Hale, the evidence presented indicates that Ashford Digital Solutions was engaged through a vendor authorization tied to your office. Can you explain that? I'd need to review my records, Marcus said smoothly, though Noah caught the faintest tremor beneath his composed exterior. Vendor authorizations pass through my office regularly. I can't be expected to personally track every contractor engagement across the company. This particular engagement, Aisha interjected, pulling up a document on the main display, was authorized with your personal digital signature, dated 6 weeks before Mr. Bennett's suspension. Ashford Digital Solutions has no other clients, no other engagements on record. Its sole activity in the past year appears to be this single contract coinciding precisely with the spoofed credential timeline. The room fell silent. Marcus's jaw tightened, and for the first time since Noah had walked in, he saw something crack in the man's carefully maintained composure. "I want to bring in an additional piece of evidence," Victoria said, nodding to Aisha, who pulled up another window. Gary Whitfield, the owner of Ashford Digital Solutions, was terminated from this company 6 years ago following a data breach investigation. Records show he has made repeated public statements on professional networking platforms expressing hostility toward my leadership specifically. I believe Mr. Hale was aware of this history and specifically engaged Mr. Whitfield's services because of it, knowing he would have both the technical capability and the personal motivation to execute this scheme convincingly. Robert Feinstein leaned forward, addressing Marcus directly. "Is that true, Marcus? Did you know about Whitfield's history with this company before authorizing the contract?" Marcus's silence lasted several long seconds, and in that silence, Noah watched 4 years of careful, patient scheming crumble in real time. "I was aware," Marcus said, finally, his voice tight. "I want to be clear. I never instructed Whitfield to fabricate evidence against an innocent employee. I engaged his firm for legitimate penetration testing, standard security auditing. Whatever he did beyond that scope was his own decision." "That's a convenient distinction," Diane said coldly. "One that's difficult to verify, and even more difficult to believe given the timing and the target of this so-called security audit happened to align precisely with your personal grievances against this company's CEO. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Diane raised a hand, cutting him off. "I think we've heard enough for today. Mr. Hale, you're suspended from your duties, effective immediately pending a full independent investigation into your conduct. I'd suggest you retain legal counsel of your own." Noah watched Marcus Hale rise from his chair, his composure finally completely gone, replaced by something bitter and cornered. He didn't look at Victoria as he gathered his things. He didn't look at anyone. He simply walked out of the boardroom, and with him went 4 years of carefully constructed resentment that had nearly cost 2 innocent people everything. The moment the door closed behind him, the tension in the room shifted, softened, and Diane turned back to Noah with an expression that had changed entirely from the guarded neutrality she'd shown at the start of the meeting. "Mr. Bennett, on behalf of this board, I owe you an apology. You were subjected to a serious accusation based on evidence we now understand to be deliberately fabricated. Your position, your badge, and full back pay for your period of suspension will be reinstated immediately. If you wish to pursue further action regarding the damage this has caused you personally, the company will not contest it." Noah felt something in his chest finally loosen 2 weeks of held breath, releasing all at once. "Thank you." He managed, his voice thick. "That means more than you know." They didn't discuss the relationship policy that day. There wasn't time. The board needed to address the fallout from Marcus Hale's suspension, coordinate with legal counsel, manage the inevitable wave of internal gossip that would need careful handling before it spiraled into something the press might catch wind of. But 3 days later, once the initial chaos had settled into something more manageable, Victoria called a smaller session, specifically to present the policy she'd been quietly drafting since the very first night this entire mess began. She stood at the head of the same table, though this time the tension in the room felt entirely different, less like a trial, more like the beginning of something. "I want to propose a formal policy," Victoria said, "governing relationships between employees at different levels of seniority within this company. Not a ban. I don't believe bans work, and I think pretending human beings won't occasionally fall for each other across an org chart is naive at best. Instead, I'm proposing a framework. Mandatory disclosure to HR once a relationship becomes serious. Automatic recusal from any decision-making that could create a conflict of interest. Independent oversight for any performance or compensation decisions involving either party. And critically, protection for the employee in the less senior position, ensuring they can never be professionally retaliated against regardless of how the relationship evolves." Robert Feinstein studied the document she'd distributed around the table. "You're essentially proposing to formalize protections for a situation you found yourself in personally." "I am," Victoria said without hesitation. Because I learned the hard way exactly how vulnerable that position can be. Noah Bennett nearly lost his entire career, his reputation, and very nearly his ability to provide for his daughter, not because of anything he did, but because he was the person with less power in a dynamic that made him an easy target. I don't ever want another employee at this company to face what he faced simply because two men found it convenient to exploit a power imbalance for their own gain. Diane Castellano was quiet for a long moment, reading through the document carefully. "This is thorough," she said finally. "More thorough than I would have expected, given how personally you're involved in the outcome. I had a lot of sleepless nights to work on it," Victoria admitted, a faint, tired smile crossing her face for the first time in weeks. The board voted to approve the policy unanimously, and as Victoria gathered her things afterward, Patricia caught her in the hallway, her expression softer than Victoria had seen it in weeks. "You did good," Patricia said simply. "For what it's worth. I almost lost him, Patricia. Almost lost everything because I wanted one selfish night to feel like a person instead of a job title." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "I don't know how to forgive myself for how close it came to destroying him." "You didn't destroy him," Patricia said gently. "You fought for him. There's a difference, and I think eventually you're going to let yourself believe that." Noah picked Lily up from school himself that afternoon. Badge reinstated. Laptop returned his entire professional life, restored to something resembling normal for the first time in over 2 weeks. She climbed into the car with her usual chatter backpack nearly as big as she was, and it took her all of 30 seconds to notice the change in her father's face. "You look happy again," she said, buckling her seatbelt. "Like actually happy. Not pretend happy. I am actually happy." Noah confirmed, pulling out of the school parking lot with a lightness in his chest he hadn't felt in what genuinely did feel like a lifetime. "The work thing got fixed." "The scary thing, the one that was making you lose your job." "Yeah, sweetheart, that one." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Turns out some people did something bad and tried to blame me for it. But the truth came out and everything's okay now." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this with the particular seriousness she brought to most things that mattered to her. Was it because of the mystery lady Rachel said the scary work thing had something to do with her? Noah hesitated at the stoplight, weighing once again how much truth an 8-year-old deserved. But he thought about what he'd told Victoria in that conference room about being done hiding about wanting whatever came next to happen because they'd chosen honesty instead of secrecy. "It's complicated," he admitted. "But yes, some of it had to do with her. She's actually the reason it got fixed, though. She fought really hard to prove I didn't do anything wrong. So she's nice. Like actually nice, not just work nice. She's actually nice." Noah confirmed, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, despite the exhaustion of the past 2 weeks still sitting heavy in his bones. "I think you'd like her." Lily considered this for a long moment as they pulled into their driveway, and then with the simple directness only children seemed capable of, she said, "Can I meet her now?" "You said eventually. It feels like eventually is probably now." Noah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep in his chest, the kind he hadn't managed in weeks. "You know what, sweetheart, I think eventually might actually be now." He pulled out his phone that evening, once Lily was settled at the kitchen table with her homework, and typed a message to Victoria, with hands that were steadier than they'd been in longer than he could remember. "Noah, Lily wants to meet you. She says eventually is now." The reply came back almost instantly, and Noah could practically hear the disbelief and hope tangled together in Victoria's voice, even through text. "Victoria, is she sure I don't want to rush anything, especially not for her?" "Noah, she's sure, and honestly, so am I. We're done hiding, remember? Both of us." "Victoria, then I would love nothing more." Noah set his phone down and looked over at his daughter, hunched over her math worksheet with the same fierce concentration she brought to everything in her small, remarkable life, and felt something settle inside his chest that had been unsettled for 7 long years. Not just relief, that the nightmare of the past 2 weeks was finally over, but something deeper. Something that felt dangerously close to hope for a future he'd stopped letting himself imagine a long time ago. He thought about the blind date that had nearly sent him running out of that restaurant before it even began. He thought about every reason he'd given himself over and over for why this could never work. Why two people from such impossibly different worlds had no business building anything real together. And for the first time, sitting in his quiet kitchen, with his daughter's homework spread across the table and his phone still warm in his hand. From Victoria's last message, none of those reasons felt as insurmountable as they once had. They met on a Saturday morning at a small park 2 blocks from Noah's house, chosen specifically because Lily had picked it herself. Neutral ground. She'd insisted like something she'd learned from one of her documentaries about treaty negotiations, though Noah suspected it was really just her favorite place to feed the ducks. Noah stood by the swings, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, watching Lily chase the wind across the open grass while he waited for a woman worth more money than he could fully comprehend to walk into his daughter's small, carefully protected world for the very first time. "You're doing the staring thing again," Lily called out, not even looking up from where she was crouched by the pond, tossing breadcrumbs to a cluster of impatient ducks. "Am I?" "Yep, nervous staring. I can tell the difference now." She straightened up, brushing crumbs off her hands, and squinted toward the parking lot. "Is that her?" Noah followed his daughter's gaze and felt his chest tighten. Not with fear this time, but with something closer to wonder, as Victoria Sterling walked toward them across the grass. Dressed down in jeans and sneakers, her hair loose around her shoulders, carrying a small gift bag. She gripped a little too tightly, betraying nerves Noah had rarely seen from her in all their weeks together. "That's her," Noah confirmed. "She looks nervous too." "She probably is." Lily considered this information with the gravity of a seasoned diplomat, then squared her small shoulders and marched forward before Noah could stop her, closing the distance between herself and Victoria with the fearless directness only an 8-year-old could manage. "Hi," Lily said, stopping directly in front of Victoria and looking up at her with an assessing stare. Noah recognized instantly the exact same look Lily's mother used to give strangers she hadn't yet decided to trust. "I'm Lily. You're the mystery lady." Victoria crouched down slightly, bringing herself closer to Lily's eye level, and Noah watched something in his daughter's posture soften just slightly at the gesture. "I am," Victoria said. "Though I promise I'm not actually that mysterious, just a little complicated like your dad said." "He said you're nice." "I hope I am." "He also said you saved his job, from bad guys." A faint smile crossed Victoria's face. "I did what I could. Your dad's a good man, Lily. He didn't deserve what happened to him, and I wasn't going to let anyone get away with hurting him." Lily studied her for a long moment, clearly weighing this information with the same seriousness she brought to everything that mattered. "I brought you something," Victoria said, holding out the gift bag. "I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I asked your dad a few questions without telling him why. I hope that's okay." Lily opened the bag carefully and pulled out a beautifully illustrated book about dinosaurs. Not the simplified children's version Noah had bought her a dozen times over, but a genuinely detailed field guide, the kind meant for older kids and adults who took paleontology seriously. "This is the real one," Lily breathed, flipping through pages of feathered raptors and towering sauropods with wide, delighted eyes. "This is the one from the museum gift shop that costs way too much money, and Dad said maybe for my birthday." "Well," Victoria said, glancing up at Noah with a small apologetic smile, "I hope it's all right that your birthday came a little early." Lily looked between the book and Victoria several times, and then without any warning at all threw her arms around Victoria's neck in a hug so sudden and fierce that Victoria nearly toppled backward onto the grass, catching herself with one hand while wrapping the other carefully around Lily's small back. Noah stood a few feet away, watching the scene unfold, and felt something crack open in his chest. 7 years of carefully guarded walls giving way all at once at the sight of his daughter, hugging a woman he'd been terrified just weeks earlier to even admit he cared about. "Okay," Lily announced, pulling back and studying Victoria one final time with the solemn authority of a judge delivering a verdict. I like her, Dad. You can keep her. Victoria laughed a real laugh, bright and unguarded. Nothing like the polished chuckle she used in boardrooms, and Noah felt his own laughter join hers. The three of them standing together in the middle of a sunlit park. Something that felt dangerously wonderfully like the beginning of a family taking shape, right there on the grass. The weeks that followed unfolded with a gentleness neither Noah nor Victoria had quite expected, given everything that had come before. Marcus Hale's formal termination was finalized within the month, the independent investigation confirming beyond any reasonable doubt his involvement in orchestrating the fraud scheme, along with several other irregularities uncovered once investigators started looking closely at his conduct over the years. Gary Whitfield faced separate legal consequences of his own, the specifics of which Victoria kept largely private, though Noah suspected the outcome had been thorough and unforgiving. Noah returned to work with his reputation fully restored, though the return wasn't without its own strange adjustments. Danny greeted him with a bear hug that nearly knocked the wind out of him, followed immediately by an avalanche of questions. Noah answered only partially, keeping the details vague, even as the broader truth of his relationship with Victoria became slowly and inevitably common knowledge throughout the building. "So it's real," Danny said one afternoon, leaning over the cubicle wall, with the particular satisfaction of a man who'd suspected something all along. "You and Sterling, actually real." "It's real," Noah confirmed, unable to keep the small smile off his face despite months of careful secrecy that had trained him to guard his expression around this exact topic. "I knew it! The staring thing! I called it weeks ago!" Danny shook his head, grinning. "You know, half this building thought you were some kind of corporate spy or something, right? Sneaking around meeting the CEO in secret." "I heard the rumors." Nobody guessed the truth. Single dad falls for his own CEO after an accidental blind date. That's not corporate espionage, man, that's a movie. Noah laughed, though something in Danny's words settled uncomfortably close to a truth he hadn't fully processed yet. How strange, how impossible this entire story would sound to anyone who hadn't lived through every terrifying, exhilarating moment of it alongside him. He didn't tell Danny everything. He didn't tell him about the sleepless nights during the investigation, wondering if he'd lose everything he'd built for Lily. He didn't tell him about the quiet, aching fear that had lived in his chest for weeks, the fear that loving Victoria Sterling might cost him more than he could ever afford to pay. Some things belonged only to the people who'd actually survived them. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself navigating an adjustment of her own, the strange, unfamiliar experience of being known fully and completely by someone who had no interest whatsoever in her net worth, or her position, or the power she wielded across an entire industry. Noah didn't care about any of that. He cared whether she'd eaten dinner. He cared whether she was sleeping enough. He cared about the exhausted crease between her eyebrows after a 14-hour day, and he'd learned without anyone teaching him exactly how to make it soften. "You do this thing," Victoria told him one evening, curled against his side on the worn couch in his modest living room, a space so different from her own pristine townhouse that she'd initially felt almost embarrassed by how much she preferred it. "You ask how my day was, and you actually wait for the answer. Nobody's done that in years. Not really." "Why wouldn't I wait for the answer?" "Because most people who ask that question are just being polite. They want the short version. Fine, busy, the usual. They don't actually want to hear about the 3-hour argument I had with our supply chain team, or the fact that I nearly fell asleep during a call with our Tokyo office because it was 2 a.m. my time." Noah tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture easy, now familiar, in a way it hadn't been just months earlier. "I want the long version," he said simply. "All of it. Even the boring parts." Victoria studied him for a long moment, something vulnerable and unguarded passing across her face. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," she said quietly. "After everything that happened, after everything I put you through." "You didn't put me through anything," Noah said firmly. "Two bitter men with old grudges did that. You're the one who fought like hell to fix it." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Besides, I could say the same thing about you. I spent 7 years convinced I didn't get to have this anymore. Convinced love was something that happened once, and when it ended, that was it. That door was closed for good. What changed your mind? Noah considered the question seriously, the way he considered most things that actually mattered. A blind date I tried to run away from. He admitted, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. And a woman who whispered my name before I could make it out the door. The relationship policy Victoria had championed before the board rippled outward through the company in ways neither of them had fully anticipated, becoming something of a quiet landmark within their industry. Other executives at other companies began reaching out, curious about the framework, asking Victoria to consult on similar policies for their own organizations, a strange, unexpected legacy born directly out of the worst 2 weeks of both their lives. You realize you accidentally started a movement, Patricia told Victoria one afternoon, sliding a stack of consulting requests across her desk. 3 other tech companies this month alone. They all want to know how you built protections for employees in your exact situation. I didn't build it to become a movement, Victoria said, scanning through the requests with a mixture of pride and lingering discomfort at how public this particular chapter of her life had become. I built it because I almost lost the person I love to a system that had absolutely no protections for people without power. Well, apparently that's exactly what a lot of companies needed to hear. Patricia smiled. For what it's worth, I think this might end up being one of the most meaningful things you've done in your entire career. More than any product launch, any market expansion. Victoria sat with that thought for a long moment after Patricia left, staring out the window at the city stretched below her office, thinking about how strange it was that the most painful chapter of her professional life had ultimately produced something genuinely good. Not just for her and Noah, but for people she'd never even meet, employees at companies she had no direct connection to, all of them, a little safer now because of a policy born out of her own near-catastrophic mistake. She thought about the version of herself who'd walked into that restaurant months earlier, desperate for one night where someone might see her as a person instead of a balance sheet. She'd gotten so much more than she bargained for that night. Not just a relationship that had upended her carefully controlled life, but a reason to finally use her power for something that mattered beyond quarterly earnings and shareholder value. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lily sent through Noah's phone, the two of them having developed an easy rapport over the past several weeks that delighted Victoria more than she knew how to fully express. Lily, Dad says we're doing pizza and a movie tonight. You're invited. I picked the movie. It has dinosaurs. Victoria smiled, typing back immediately. Victoria, I wouldn't miss it. Save me a seat. Lily, I already did. Right next to Dad. He gets nervous when you're not close enough. Victoria laughed out loud in her empty office, shaking her head at the easy, unfiltered honesty only an 8-year-old could offer. She gathered her things for the evening, already looking forward to pizza and dinosaurs, and the particular kind of ordinary happiness she'd spent most of her adult life believing wasn't meant for someone like her. 6 months after that first disastrous, wonderful blind date, Noah found himself standing in his kitchen on a Tuesday evening watching Lily attempt to teach Victoria how to properly load a dishwasher. A task Victoria approached with the same intense focus she brought to quarterly board presentations, much to Lily's endless amusement. You're doing it wrong, Lily informed, her hands on her hips, in an exact imitation of an expression Noah recognized as entirely her mother's. Plates go on the bottom, cups go on top. It's not that complicated. I run a billion-dollar technology company, Victoria said, mock-offended. And you're telling me I can't figure out a dishwasher? Running a company and loading a dishwasher are different skills, Victoria. Dad says so all the time. Noah, leaning against the counter with a dish towel over his shoulder, laughed loud enough that both of them turned to look at him. I stand by that assessment, he confirmed. Victoria shot him a playful glare before turning back to the dishwasher, carefully rearranging the plates under Lily's watchful, exacting supervision. There was something about this moment, something so small, so utterly unremarkable in the grand scheme of everything they'd survived together, that struck Noah with unexpected force. This was what he'd been afraid to want for 7 years. Not the grand gestures, not the fairy tale romance people wrote movies about. But this. ordinary, domestic, safe. Later that night, once Lily was asleep and the kitchen was finally clean, to her exacting 8-year-old standards, Noah and Victoria sat together on the back porch steps, the evening air cool and quiet around them. "Can I tell you something?" Victoria said, her voice softer than usual. "Always. I used to think happiness looked like success, like winning, like proving everyone who ever doubted me wrong." She looked out at the small, unremarkable backyard string lights Noah had hung along the fence, casting a warm glow across the grass. "I spent 20 years chasing that version of happiness, and I got it. I got everything I set out to build, and I was still lonely every single night in a house too big for one person." And now, Victoria turned to look at him, something soft and certain in her expression. "Now I know what actual happiness looks like. It looks like loading a dishwasher wrong and getting scolded by an 8-year-old. It looks like pizza on a Tuesday. It looks like you asking about the boring parts of my day and actually meaning it." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I spent so long thinking I had to choose between running my company and having a real life. I don't think that's true anymore. I think I just needed the right reason to want both." Noah brought her hand to his lips, pressing a slow kiss against her knuckles. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I spent 7 years thinking love was something that only happened once, and when it ended, that door closed permanently. I built an entire life around that belief. Protected myself, protected Lily, never let anyone close enough to matter." He met her eyes in the dim porch light. "You walked into a restaurant and completely dismantled 7 years of careful walls in one dinner. I didn't think that was possible anymore. Are you upset about that? Not even a little." They sat together in comfortable silence for a long moment, the string lights flickering gently in the evening breeze, the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood settling around them, a dog barking somewhere down the street, the distant hum of traffic, the particular stillness of a life finally fully at peace. Troink. The following spring, nearly a year to the day, since that first accidental blind date, Noah stood in the same restaurant where it had all begun, his hands trembling slightly as he waited at the same table where Victoria had once whispered his name and stopped him from walking out the door forever. He'd asked Rachel to help arrange it, sworn her to secrecy under threat of never being allowed to babysit again, and she'd delighted in every second of the planning. Clearly thrilled to finally play matchmaker to a relationship she'd accidentally started in the first place. Victoria walked in exactly on time, dressed in the same elegant blazer she'd worn that very first night, though her expression shifted the moment she recognized the restaurant, then the table, then finally Noah standing beside it, instead of sitting across from it. "What's all this?" she asked, though something in her voice suggested she already suspected the answer. "A year ago," Noah said, his voice steadier than he expected, given how hard his heart was hammering against his ribs. "I sat at this exact table ready to run out that door the second I recognized you. I thought dating my CEO was the single worst idea I'd ever heard in my life. I thought two people from completely different worlds had no business trying to build anything together. You've mentioned that once or twice." Victoria said, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth, though her eyes had already started to glisten. "I was wrong," Noah continued, "about all of it. Turns out the worlds weren't as different as I thought. Turns out the thing that actually mattered wasn't the title on your business card or the number on my paycheck. It was you, seeing me for the first time in longer than I could remember, and somehow impossibly wanting to stay." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box, and Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, tears finally spilling over as understanding dawned across her face. "Victoria Sterling," Noah said, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of the restaurant, ignoring the small cluster of nearby diners who'd already begun to notice. "You walked into my life through the most impossible, terrifying, wonderful mistake either of us ever made. You fought for me when I had nothing left to fight with myself. You loved my daughter like she was already yours before either of us knew if this would even work. I don't have a fraction of your resources, your title, your world, But I have everything else, all of it completely for the rest of my life, if you'll have me." "Yes," Victoria said, before he'd even finished laughing and crying at the same time, pulling him up from his knee into a kiss that neither of them cared who was watching. Yes, 1,000 times yes. The small crowd of onlookers broke into applause, and Noah felt something settle fully into place inside his chest. Not the frantic protective caution that had governed his life for 7 long years, but something steadier. Something that felt for the first time in longer than he could remember, entirely certain. They married in the fall, in a small ceremony, in the backyard of Noah's house, rather than any of the extravagant venues Victoria's world would have expected of her. Lily served as flower girl, taking her role with the same fierce seriousness she brought to everything, scattering rose petals down the makeshift aisle, with the concentration of a girl determined to do the job perfectly. Rachel stood beside Noah as his best woman, dabbing at her eyes throughout the entire ceremony, occasionally leaning over to whisper, "I told you so," every time Noah glanced her way. Patricia sat in the front row on Victoria's side, having become over the past year something closer to family than employee, watching the woman she'd worked alongside for nearly a decade finally choose happiness over ambition. Victoria's vows, when she spoke them, carried none of the polished confidence she brought to boardrooms and shareholder meetings. Her voice shook genuinely, beautifully unguarded, in a way Noah had only ever seen in the private moments between them. "I spent my entire adult life believing that power and love couldn't coexist," she said, holding both of Noah's hands in hers. "That I had to choose between being taken seriously and being truly known. You taught me that was never true. You taught me that the version of myself who loads the dishwasher wrong and gets scolded by an 8-year-old is just as real, just as valuable as the version who runs a company. Maybe more so. I promise to keep choosing that version of myself and of us for the rest of my life." Noah's vows were simpler, quieter, though no less certain. "I spent 7 years convinced I'd used up my one chance at love, and that protecting my heart meant never risking it again," he said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer felt any need to hide. "You proved me wrong the moment you whispered my name in a restaurant I nearly ran out of. I promise to never run again. Not from you. Not from us. Not from whatever life throws at either of us. I promise to keep choosing this. Choosing you every single day exactly the way you chose to fight for me, when it would have been so much easier not to." Lily, sitting between Rachel and Patricia in the front row, watched her father and Victoria exchange rings with an expression of profound, uncomplicated joy. The look of a child who had waited a long time to see her father truly happy again, and who understood in the way only children fully understand these things, that she was gaining something rather than losing anything at all. Years later, when people asked Victoria how she managed to balance running one of the most successful technology companies in the country with a genuinely happy marriage and a family she adored, she would tell them the truth. The same truth she'd told the board on that terrifying afternoon when everything had nearly fallen apart, that success and happiness were never actually in competition with each other. Not really. That the version of herself who'd nearly lost everything trying to keep those two things separate had been operating under a false premise her entire life. She would tell them about the workplace relationship policy that had started as a desperate personal attempt to protect the man she loved and had grown into something that changed how her entire industry thought about power imbalances and workplace protections. She would tell them, when pressed about Marcus Hale and Gary Whitfield, about the 2 weeks that had nearly destroyed everything she'd built. Not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of workplace relationships, but as proof of exactly the opposite. Proof that some things were worth fighting for, even when fighting meant risking everything you'd spent a lifetime building. Noah, for his part, eventually left his position in IT, not because anyone pushed him out, but because Victoria had quietly, patiently encouraged him to finally pursue the engineering path he'd abandoned 7 years earlier, funding his return to school without ever once making him feel like charity. He graduated with honors at 39 years old, walking across a stage with his wife and daughter, cheering louder than anyone else in the entire auditorium, finally claiming a dream he'd sacrificed for the sake of stability, only to discover that love Real love made room for both. Lily grew up between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly separate: the quiet, grounded normalcy her father had built for her after her mother's death, and the ambitious, driven world her stepmother navigated with equal parts fierce competence and hard-won humility. She thrived in both, carrying forward a lesson neither Noah nor Victoria had ever needed to teach her directly, because she'd watched them live it every single day of her childhood. That the people who truly saw you, who chose to stay even when staying was difficult, were worth more than any title or dollar amount the world tried to attach to a person's value. On quiet evenings, long after the chaos of that first terrifying month had faded into nothing more than a story they occasionally told at dinner parties, Noah would sometimes catch Victoria staring at him across the kitchen with an expression he'd come to recognize instantly: quiet disbelief, gratitude, the particular wonder of someone who still, after everything, couldn't quite believe her own good fortune. What? He'd ask every time, though he already knew the answer. Nothing, she'd say, smiling. Just thinking about how close I came to never sitting down at that table. And every time Noah would cross the kitchen, pull her into his arms, and remind her of the only truth that had ever really mattered between them, that some collisions weren't accidents at all, but the exact moment two broken, guarded hearts finally found their way home. Because in the end, that was the whole story distilled down to its simplest, truest form: a single father who had stopped believing in second chances, and a woman who had everything, except someone who truly saw her finding in each other the one thing neither of them had ever expected to find. Again, a life worth staying for, built not on power or money or careful calculation, but on the simple, unshakable choice to love each other fully and completely for the rest of their lives.